The arrest of David Berkowitz, the notorious Son of Sam, and the subsequent investigation into his crimes marked a turning point in the way serial killers were perceived, both in the media and in the public eye. While his killing spree may have ended in 1977, the legacy of the Son of Sam killings and Berkowitz's complex persona continued to haunt New York City and the broader public for decades to come. His case has since become a touchstone for discussions about crime, psychology, and media sensationalism, making Berkowitz an inadvertent cultural icon. This chapter explores the continuing public obsession with Berkowitz's story, how his case influenced the true crime genre, and the way his media portrayal turned him into a symbol of fear, fascination, and mystery. The Son of Sam case was a media phenomenon from the moment the first murder was committed. But as Berkowitz was caught and brought to trial, the media's fixation only intensified. The shocking nature of the murders, the mysterious letters, and the seemingly random nature of his victims made Berkowitz's case one of the most talked about criminal cases in American history. In the late 1970s and 1980 seconds, television and print media began to shape the public's view of serial killers. Berkowitz's taunting letters to the media, his calm demeanor during his trial, and his bizarre claims about being possessed by a demon dog all contributed to a larger-than-life mythos around him. The media dubbed him the Son of Sam, cementing his place in the public consciousness as a notorious figure. The fact that Berkowitz did not fit the typical profile of a serial killer, the quiet loner who blends into society, only added to the mystique. His background was unremarkable, his upbringing relatively normal, yet he had committed horrific acts. This paradox, how a seemingly normal man could commit such unspeakable crimes, fascinated the public and gave rise to a new era of serial killer media fascination. Newspapers, documentaries, and true crime books about Berkowitz proliferated. His story was not just about the murders, but about understanding how someone like him could become the monster known as the Son of Sam. Experts, psychologists, and criminologists speculated about his motivations, contributing to a larger discourse about the nature of evil, mental illness, and criminal behavior. Before Berkowitz, serial killers like Ted Bundy and the Zodiac Killer had captured the public's attention, but Berkowitz's story was unique in how it captured the public imagination. The combination of the Son of Sam's violent crimes, his public letters, and his eventual arrest created an enduring narrative of fear, mystery, and morbid fascination. As the media continued to cover his case, Berkowitz became a symbol of evil for a new generation of Americans. The public consumed the details of his crimes, eagerly awaiting any new information. Berkowitz's identity shifted from that of a faceless killer to a man with a complex psychological profile, someone whose actions and motives seemed to require deeper exploration. The press coverage of Berkowitz, especially as he sat in court with his disturbing confessions and religious conversions, helped elevate him to a cultural icon. He was no longer just a criminal, he had become the face of a new type of criminal celebrity. Berkowitz's role as the Son of Sam became synonymous with fear, and his case paved the way for future serial killers to become media icons as well. In the years after his conviction, Berkowitz's name would become a staple in true crime discourse, studied by criminologists and portrayed in documentaries. His crimes were recounted in film and print, and the public's fixation on him continued to grow. Berkowitz's case had a lasting impact on the true crime genre, especially in how it explored the psychology of serial killers. Before Berkowitz, true crime was often a straightforward recounting of the facts of the case, who the victims were, how the crime was committed, and who the perpetrator was. But the Son of Sam case introduced a new dimension to the genre, the psychological exploration of the killer. Berkowitz's changing story, from his early claims of being possessed by a demon to his later, more contrite statements about his crimes, invited a deeper examination of the human mind. Was Berkowitz simply a madman, driven by a delusion, or was he a cold, calculating killer who manipulated the system? This ongoing question became central to the public's understanding of serial killers, and it spurred a shift in how these cases were covered. The true crime genre, now a mainstream cultural phenomenon, owes much of its success to the Son of Sam case. Berkowitz's case set the stage for the genre's focus on the psychology of the killer, shifting from a narrative focused solely on the crime to one that sought to understand the motivation behind the violence. Books, documentaries, and podcasts about Berkowitz have since proliferated, contributing to the genre's modern-day popularity. His story is still cited in criminology studies, and his psychological profile remains a subject of fascination for those trying to understand the complexities of serial killing. The obsession with Berkowitz and his crimes raises a key question: why do we care so much about killers like him? The public's fascination with serial killers is not just about the crimes they commit, it's about the psychological complexity they represent. Berkowitz's case, in particular, sparked an interest in understanding how an ordinary person could become a monster. His story was not just about murder, it was about the mind of the killer. Part of the public's intrigue lies in the complexity of the killer's psyche. Berkowitz did not fit the typical mold of a serial killer. He was not an isolated loner, nor did he fit the profile of someone who had suffered extreme trauma. Instead, his case presented a psychological enigma, a man who had been, on the surface, ordinary, yet capable of horrific violence. How did he become the Son of Sam? What led him to commit such grisly murders? Additionally, Berkowitz's own evolving story, the changing accounts of his motivations, his conflicting narratives about his mental state, and his eventual conversion to Christianity has kept the public engaged. Berkowitz's continued willingness to speak about his crimes and the contradictions in his statements ensured that his story remained captivating. Even after decades, his case continues to be revisited, analyzed, and debated by true crime enthusiasts. David Berkowitz's case also raises troubling questions about fame and its dark side. As his case unfolded, Berkowitz became more than just a killer. He became a symbol. His letters, media interviews, and court appearances fed into the sensationalist narrative the press had created around him. Over time, he became as much a product of the media as he was a perpetrator of crime. Serial killers, like Berkowitz, often become infamous. In fact, some researchers believe that the media's treatment of these criminals may contribute to the phenomenon of killer celebrity. Berkowitz's case, which began as a horrifying crime spree, was turned into a story of myth and legend, with every new detail feeding into the larger-than-life persona the media created. His notoriety, in many ways, has cemented his place in the cultural memory as a symbol of the dangers of fascination with crime and the role media plays in shaping public perception of criminals. The case of the Son of Sam is far from a closed chapter. The legacy of David Berkowitz continues to haunt both the true crime genre and the collective cultural memory of America. His crimes, his confusing narratives, and his transformation into a media icon are still a source of intrigue and controversy. The mystery of Berkowitz's motivations, whether he was truly a victim of his own mental illness or a calculating killer, remains unsolved. In the years following his conviction, David Berkowitz became a figure of profound public interest, not only for his horrific crimes, but also for the dramatic transformation he claimed to undergo during his time in prison. Berkowitz's story was far from over. In fact, as he spent time in prison, his narrative evolved, shifting from that of a cold-blooded killer to a man who, he claimed, had found redemption through faith. This chapter delves into Berkowitz's self-proclaimed journey of spiritual awakening, his reflections on his crimes, and the ongoing debates about whether true redemption is possible for someone who committed such horrific acts. In the early 1980s, just a few years after being sentenced to multiple life terms for his murders, David Berkowitz announced a significant change in his life. He had found God, he claimed. His conversion to Christianity was a turning point, both for him personally and for the way he was perceived by the public. Berkowitz's conversion was not just a change in his religious affiliation, it marked the beginning of a transformation in his public persona. Where once he was the arrogant killer who reveled in his notoriety, now he presented himself as a man seeking atonement, redemption, and forgiveness. He began to distance himself from the Son of Sam persona, referring to his past self as a monster, and expressing remorse for the murders he had committed. Over time, Berkowitz made several public statements about his newfound faith. He began to give interviews to religious publications, claiming that he had repented for his sins and that he now viewed his life through a different lens. Berkowitz said that he had been born again and that he was now dedicated to helping others find spiritual salvation. He also expressed regret for the lives he had taken and made efforts to reach out to the victims' families, offering apologies and seeking to make amends in whatever way he could. But despite these claims, many people remained skeptical. Was this transformation genuine, or was Berkowitz simply trying to gain sympathy and avoid the reality of his actions? Could someone who had committed such heinous crimes truly be redeemed, or was he just seeking to escape the consequences of his past? Berkowitz's story of redemption is one that continues to stir debate. For some, his conversion to Christianity and his public expressions of remorse are proof that people can change, no matter how dark their past may be. Supporters point to his dedication to religion, his apparent remorse for his crimes, and his efforts to live a better life as signs that he has genuinely turned his life around. But others argue that no amount of remorse or religious conversion can make up for the atrocities he committed. Berkowitz's actions, they argue, are beyond redemption. His victims, their families, and the community of New York City, who had lived in fear of his violence, could never be fully compensated by Berkowitz's words or his newfound faith. Redemption, for many, is not just about repentance. It's about taking responsibility for the harm caused and making tangible efforts to right the wrongs. One of the most profound questions that Berkowitz's case raises is whether or not anyone, no matter how evil their actions, can truly redeem themselves. Is it possible for a killer to ever fully atone for the lives they've taken? And even if someone like Berkowitz can change, does that mean they should be forgiven, or does the nature of his crimes make redemption an impossibility? Over the years, Berkowitz continued to write letters, give interviews, and speak publicly about his transformation. But despite his claims of reform, there were several contradictions in his story that raised questions about his sincerity. At times, Berkowitz seemed genuinely remorseful, expressing deep regret for the pain he had caused. He often spoke about the profound impact that his religious faith had on his worldview, and he even started to help other inmates by leading Bible studies and offering spiritual guidance. In some of his letters, he stated that he had found peace and had learned to accept responsibility for his actions. But in other interviews, Berkowitz seemed to reveal a more self-serving side. He sometimes hinted that his actions were the result of external forces, like his mental illness or the demon Sam, or suggested that he had been manipulated by others to commit the murders. These inconsistencies in his narrative caused many to question whether his conversion was genuine or simply a way to avoid facing the full reality of his crimes. Berkowitz's story, it seemed, was still a work in progress. The contradictions in his statements suggested that while he may have believed in his own transformation, the full extent of his guilt and the reasons behind his violence remained unresolved. For the families of Berkowitz's victims, his claims of redemption were difficult to accept. They had lived through the horror of his crimes and carried the burden of grief for years, and Berkowitz's sudden conversion could not erase the pain of losing their loved ones. Many of the victims' families never received any direct apology from Berkowitz, and for them, his public statements of remorse did not bring the closure they sought. Some families of the victims rejected Berkowitz's attempts at redemption, stating that no amount of remorse could ever bring back their loved ones. They argued that the real penance would come in the form of consistent accountability for his actions, not just words of regret. The emotional toll of the murders remained with them, and while some may have accepted Berkowitz's apology, many felt that it did not go far enough to repair the damage he had caused. For other victims' families, Berkowitz's transformation into a man of faith was seen as a small consolation, a sign that the person who had killed their loved ones had at least come to recognize the magnitude of his actions. But the question remained, was his change genuine, or was it just another layer in a long history of manipulative behavior? As Berkowitz spent more years behind bars, he continued to be a subject of public interest. His story was revisited in documentaries, books, and even in podcasts that examined the psychological implications of his crimes. Despite his incarceration, Berkowitz's voice remained part of the conversation, as his case continued to raise questions about the nature of criminal behavior, mental illness, and the possibility of redemption. In 2004, Berkowitz was interviewed again, this time acknowledging that his claim of being possessed by the demon Sam was simply an excuse for his own violent actions. He expressed remorse for using the demon as a scapegoat and took full responsibility for the murders. For many, this admission was a crucial step in acknowledging his guilt, but it didn't erase the pain he had caused. Today, Berkowitz remains in prison, serving his sentence for the murders of 6 people and the wounding of several others. His claims of redemption continue to stir controversy. Some view him as a man who has genuinely changed, while others see his transformation as another attempt to shift the blame away from his own actions. As we examine Berkowitz's journey from killer to man of faith, the question of whether true redemption is possible remains at the forefront. Can someone who committed such horrific acts ever truly change? Can the darkness within a killer be reformed, or is it an indelible part of their nature? In the next chapter, we will explore the final moments of the Son of Sam story, looking at the legacy of his crimes and the unanswered questions that continue to haunt New York City. What lessons, if any, can we learn from Berkowitz's life, and how does his case shape our understanding of crime, punishment, and redemption? Stay tuned as we conclude this deep dive into the life and legacy of David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and drop your comments below.